Well, howdy doody. I'm reading this book by William Least Heat Moon. He's a American Indian called Blue Highways. Evidently the blue highways were the minor roads marked on the maps with blue lines. He's come from Missouri somewhere in his camper van, and he's in Tennessee, and he's heard of this town called Nameless. So he's in a diner, and he's talking to the waitress, and he asks her if she knows where Nameless is. So he says, "Do you know the way to Nameless?" "Nameless? I've heard of Nameless. Better ask the ambulance driver in the corner booth." She pinned a smiley button onto my jacket. "His name's Bob, by the way." "The ambulance driver?" "No, the smiley. I always name my smileys, otherwise they all look alike. I'd talk to him before you go." "The smiley?" "Ah, the ambulance driver." So I went looking for Nameless, Tennessee, with a smiley button named Bob. So he's talking to the ambulance driver now. "I don't know if I got directions for where you're going," the ambulance driver said. "I think there's a Nameless down the Shepherdsville Road. When I get to Shepherdsville, will I have gone too far?" "Ain't no Shepherdsville." "How will I know when I'm there?" "Can't say for certain." "What's Nameless look like?" "Don't recollect." "Is the road paved?" "It's possible." Those were the directions. I was looking for an unnumbered road named after a non-existent town that would take me to a place called Nameless that nobody was sure existed. This is brilliant. This is a beautiful passage. So he drives there, and he can't find it, of course. Anyway, so he stops along the way to ask for directions. Okay, here we go. "I stopped beside a big man loading tools into a pickup. I may be lost. Where do you lose the right road?" "I don't know. Somewhere around 1965. Highway 56, you mean?" "I came down 56. I think I should have turned at the last junction." "Only thing down that road, stumps and huckleberries. And the berries ain't there in March." "Where you trying to get to?" "Nameless, if there is such a place." "Well, you might not know Furman Watson, but he's got him a store down that road. That's Nameless at his store. Still there all right, but I might not vouch you that tomorrow." He came up to the van. "In my army days, I wrote Nameless, Tennessee, for my place of birth on all the papers, even though I lived on this end of the ridge. All these ridges and hollers got names of their own. That steam mill holler over yonder, named after the steam engine in the grist mill. Miller had him just one arm, but he done a good business." So they have a conversation. And anyway, this fellow who's called Medicine Wheeler sets him on the right road. and he says that he's had a store himself, but it's gone bust, and his back's given out, and he's now working at a factory in a bigger town, Cookville. And so he says people from all over the nation, Florida, Mississippi, are coming in here to retire because it's good country, but our young ones don't stay on. Not much in the way to make a living in here anymore. Take me. I've been beaten on these stumps all my life, trying to farm these hills. They don't give much up to you, fighting rocks and briars all the time. One of the first things I recollect is swinging a briar blade, filed out an old saw it was. Now they come in with them crawlers and push out a pasture in a day. Still, it's a grudging land, like the good. Got the hard cuss good seed, they say, to get it up out of the ground. So then they talk a bit more. He looked up suddenly. My apologies. I didn't ask you what you do that gets you up here into these hollows. I told him I'd only been gone 6 days on the road, but my account of the trip already had taken on some polish. He nodded. Satisfaction is doing what's important to yourself. A man ought to honour other people, but he's got to honour what he believes in too. As I started the engine, Wheeler said, "If you get back this way, stop in and see me. Always got beans and taters and a little piece of meat." Down along the ridge, I wondered why it's always those who live on little who are the ones who ask you to dinner. Nameless, Tennessee, is a town of maybe 90 people, a dozen houses, a couple of barns, some churches, a general merchandise store selling fire chief gasoline, a community centre. Behind that's a rusting metal privy with "Paint Me" on the door. Next to a red tobacco barn was the general merchandise store. I knocked. The door opened part way. A tall, thin man said, "Closed up for good," and started to shut the door. I said, "I don't want to buy anything. Just got a question for Mr. Furman Watson." The man peered through the slight opening. He looked me over. "What question would that be?" "If this is nameless, Tennessee, could he tell me how it got that name?" The man turned back into the store and called out, "Miss Jenny, somebody here wants to know how Nameless came to be nameless." Miss Jenny edged to the door and looked at me and my truck over. Clearly, she didn't approve. She said, "You know as well as I do, Thurmond. Don't keep him on the stoop in the damp to tell him." Miss Jenny, I found out, was Mrs. Virginia Watts, Thurman's wife. I stepped in, and they both began telling the story, adding a detail here, another correcting a fact there, both smiling at the foolishness of it all. It seems the hilltop settlement went for years without a name. Then one day the post office told the people if they wanted their mail up on the mountain, they would have to give the place a name you could properly address a letter to. The community met. There were only a handful, but they commenced debating. Some wanted patriotic names, some names from nature. One man recommended, in all seriousness, his own name. Finally, a fellow tired of the talk. He didn't like the mail he received anyway. "Forget the darn post office," he said. This here's a nameless place if I ever seen one. So leave it be." And that's just what they did. Watts pointed out the window. "We used to have signs on the road, but the Halloween boys keep tearing them down." "You think Nameless is a funny name," Miss Jenny said. "I see it plain in your eyes. Well, you take yourself up north a piece to Difficult, or Defeated, or Shake Rag. Now them are silly names." The old store, lighted by 3 50-watt bulbs, smelled of coal oil and baking bread. In the middle of the rectangular room, where the oak floor sagged a little, stood an iron stove. On the shelves around the walls sat earthen jugs with corn cob stoppers, a few canned goods. I asked Furman how long he'd been in the store. 35 years, but we closed up the first day of this year. We're hoping to sell it to a churchly couple, upright people, no atheists. "Did you build the store?" "I built this one, but it's the 3rd general store on the ground. I fear it'll be the last. I take no pleasure in that. Once you could come in here for a gallon of paint, a pickle, a pair of shoes, or a can of corn." "Or horehound candy," Miss Jenny said, "or corsets and salves. We had cough syrups and all that for the body. In season we'd buy and sell blackberries and walnuts and chestnuts before the blight got them. And outside Thurmond milled corn and sharpened ploughs, even shoot a horse sometimes. We could fix up a horse or a man or a baby," Watts said. "Thurmond, tell him we had a doctor on the ridge in them days." "We had a doctor on the ridge in them days, as good as any doctor a-livin'. He'd cut a crooked toenail or deliver a woman. Dead these last 10 years. I got some bad ham meat one day," Miss Jenny said, "and took to vomiting. All day, all night, hanging on the drop edge of yonder." I said to Thurmond, "Unless you want shut of me, call the doctor." "I studied on it," Watts said. "You never did. You got him right now. He came over and put 3 drops of iodine in a half glass of well water. I drank it down and the vomiting stopped with the last swallow. Would you think iodine would do that?" He put Miss Jenny on 1 teaspoon of spirits of ammonia in well water for her nerves. Ain't nothing works better for her to this day. Calms me like the hand of the Lord. He knew the old medicines, Watts said. The only drugstore he needed was a good kitchen cabinet. None of them antibiotics that hit you worsen your ailment. Forgotten law now, the old medicines, because there ain't profit in ID. Miss Jenny started back to the side room, where she and her sister, Marilyn, were taking apart a duck-down mattress to make bolsters. She stopped at the window for another look at my truck. "How do you sleep in that thing? Ain't you all cramped and cold?" "How does the clam sleep in his shell?" Watts said in my defence. "Thurman," she said, "get the boy a piece of buttermilk pie before he goes." "Hilda," he said to his daughter, "get him some buttermilk pie." He looked at me. "You like good music?" I said I did. He crunked up an old Edison phonograph, the kind with a big Morning Glory blossom for a speaker, and put on a wax cylinder. "This will be my mother's prayer," he said. Still going? Yep. While I ate buttermilk pie, Watts served as disc jockey of Nameless, Tennessee. Here's Mountain Rose. It was one of those moments that you know at the time will stay with you to the grave. The sweet pie, the gaunt man playing the old music, the coals in the stove, glowing orange, the scent of kerosene and hot bread. His Evening Rhapsody. The music was so heavily romantic, we both laughed. I thought, it is for this that I have come. Miss Jenny came out from the back room. "Thurman, give him some lunch. Still looks hungry." Hilda pulled food off the wood stove in the back room. Home butchered and canned whole hog sausage, home canned June apples, turnip greens, coleslaw, potatoes, stuffing, hot cornbread, all delicious. Watts and Hilda sat and talked while I ate. "Wish you could join me." "We've ate," Watts said. "Can't beat a wood stove for flavourful cooking." He told me he was raised in a 150-year-old cabin, still standing in one of the hollows. "How many's left," he said, "that grew up in a log cabin? I ain't the last surely, but I must be climbing on the list." Hilda cleared the table. "You Watts ladies know how to cook," I said. "She's in nursing school at Tennessee Tech. I went over for one of them football games last year here at Coville. To say Cookville, you let the word collapse in on itself so that it comes out Coville." "Do you like football?" I asked. "Don't know. I was so high up in that stadium I never opened my eyes." Watts went to the back and returned with a fat spiral notebook that he set on the table. His expression had changed. "Miss Jenny's death book," he said. The thing startled me. Was it something I was supposed to sign? He opened it but said nothing. There were scads of names, written in a tidy hand over pages incised to crinkliness by a ballpoint. Chronologically, the names had piled up: wives, grandparents, a stillborn infant, relatives, friends, close and distant. Names, names, names. After each, the date of the unknown, finally known and transcribed. The last entry bore yesterday's date. She wrote out 20 years' worth. Every day she listens to the hospital report on the radio and puts the names in. Folks come by to check a date, or they just turn through the books, read them like a scrapbook. Hilda said, like St. Peter at the gates, inscribing the names. Watts took my arm. Come along. He led me to the fruit cellar under the store. As we went down, he said, always take a newborn baby upstairs before you take him downstairs. Otherwise, you'll incline him downwards. The cellar was dry and full of cobwebs, and jar after jar of home-canned food. The bottles organised as a shopkeeper would: sausage, pumpkin, sweet pickles, tomatoes, corn relish, blackberries, peppers, squash, jellies. He held a hand out towards the dusty bottles. Our tomorrows. Our tomorrows. Upstairs, he said, hope to sell the store to the right folk. I see now, though, it'll be somebody off in the ridge. I studied on it, and maybe it's the end of our place. He stirred the coals. This store could give a comfortable living, but not likely to get you rich. But just getting by is dice rolling to people nowadays. I never did see my day guaranteed. When it was time to go, Watts said, if you find anyone along your way wants a good store, tell them about us. I said I would. Miss Ginny and Hilda and Marilyn came out to say goodbye. It was cold and drizzling again. Weather to give a man the weary drizzles, Watts grumbled. Where you headed from here? I don't know. Can't get lost then. Miss Ginny looked again at my rig. It had worried her from the first, as it had my mother. I hope you don't get yourself killed in that darn thing, gallivanting around the country. Come back when the hills dry off, Watts said. We'll go looking for some of them round rocks, all sparkly inside. I thought for a moment, geodes? Them's the ones. The country's properly full of them. Isn't that brilliant? He then goes through Tennessee into the, I can't remember now, the next states, North Carolina. It's a lovely book. He's an American Indian who's lost his job as an English teacher and busted up with his wife, and then he hit the road in this camper van from Middle America, went east, down to the south, over to the west, up the west coast, across the top, and then back home. I'm only about less than a third through. It really is a lovely book. I was very pleased to find it. I hope you enjoyed that reading. I'm very pleased to be able to share it with you, because sharing with you these kind of things means a lot to me, and I hope it does to you too. I love you, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.